Hey Wrecker, what's going on, man?
Nick, my man, I'm at the other end of the world. My laptop died. I don't know where to take it. It's early in the morning, but I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine.
You're not fine. You're
No,
not
I'm not
fine.
fine.
It's an artifact issue.
Yeah, it's a computer issue.
So she spoke up. That's Monideepa Tarafdar, who's the new editor-in-chief of JAIS. So we're going to talk about your plans for the journal. So Monideepa, I don't know if you know this, but I'm one of those people that's in our field of information systems. It's pretty much unequivocal that we've always had ISR and MISQ. Everybody thinks of those as like the elite publications and all of that. And then when I was growing up, it's kind of like JMIS was the third. And that everyone was always kind of cheering for JAIS, but it was never quite. And what I think it's there. And I'm always arguing for, is it there? Is it equal to JMIS? Is it better than JMIS? I would put JAIS as the third, but definitely rounding out the top four journals in the field of information systems. What do you think about this whole ranking system I have?
I think that JIS has had a very good journey so far, and
Yes,
editors,
absolutely.
the editors that we have had they've done what was needed to take this journal forward. Nothing happens overnight. It's always an evolution. And the thing that is, that speaks for JIS, and that is, that JIS's strength has been, it's always been moving forward in various ways. And we're on a journey. It's only a matter of time, is my belief, that Nick, your evaluation system is going to change, and you're going to say that we have three top journals or four top journals instead of, I can speak for JAI, so I can say three top journals. I
Yeah.
can't speak for any other journal. Regarding, you also mentioned about, growing up and cheering for JAIS. This is what I feel is very special to JAIS. As I said, it's our journal, it's our association's journal. And so when we cheer for JAIS, we are cheering for more than just a journal. We are cheering for our discipline, we are cheering for our community, we are cheering for our association. And I think that is something special about JAIS, which is really special, I feel. Yes.
Wow.
Monideepa, let me jump on that one specifically. We might touch upon this later, but I think this last point, this is our journal. I think that gets ever more important these days, right? If you look at what some of the commercial publishers are doing, and how they, some would say slowly but surely are impacting how academics run their journals. If you look at the old AIs coming into the publishing process, etc., I think it's absolutely crucial that we as a community, we have our own journals, and we have literally 100% control over what's going on. And that is
Mhm.
not the same if you're like, for example, I know Robert Davison from ISJ. I know the editors from JSIS, and they're with Wiley and they're with Elsevier respectively. And these editors are at times moaning about their big publishing houses that run their journals. So they have at least some issues with these publishing houses, and
Mhm.
JIS does not, right? And I think that's going to be a key asset going forward, and we must never lose that. Like I don't think that at this day and age, it's really important that we keep a very good journal of our association, of our own community, and of course, it has to be a very good journal. That's the responsibility that comes with it. Would you agree with that?
There's two things there, Jan, that I want to talk about. The first is, when I say our journal, if you look at JAIS, the board, the running of it, the day-to-day operations of it, the selection of the editor, it all happens through our members, through our community. And that, I think, is a strength, because it takes in a lot of different views when we run this journal, when we take this journal forward, when we look at the leadership or decide on the leadership of this journal. That's the first thing. The second thing about the thread that you mentioned, uh, we know now that journals are now in two categories, maybe possibly more, but at least two. The first category are those journals which are run by commercial houses, and you mentioned that, Jan.
Mhm.
And the second category, as we would say, our journals, including JAIS, MISQ, ISR, these are run by our associations, different kinds of associations,
Yes.
right? Now, if you're on a commercial platform, then you're part of many other journals which are on the same platform. And we are not. We are on an AIS platform, ISR is on an Informs platform, and so on and so forth. So what's going to happen is, and what is actually happening is, that these platforms are running the journals in many ways. For example, they can decide what to do with your articles. There are I read articles recently which say that so and so commercial publication is taking the articles such as what you and I write and selling it to large learning, companies that make
Yes.
large learning models, and therefore it's a double whammy. We are working, we are giving the articles, we are giving the intellectual freedom, the property, and then that gets taken away in terms of commercial, transactions, and then that goes to train those models, and then that comes back who knows where, because these platforms are all interrelated. So the threat, I feel that I wouldn't say it's a threat, but I think it's a distinction that we have. It may not always be advantages, is that we are on an isolated platform. And to the extent that other platforms are linked, and then if they get linked to search engines, then it has implications of what articles are coming up when you
Mhm.
search for it, what knowledge is going into the large language model, which then creates something and cites other papers. So it's true that academic journals have freedom. We have the freedom to manage our journals, but that freedom comes with awareness, should come with awareness, vigilance, and responsibility. We don't want to get into a place where we are isolated from, the platform that tells you, okay, what articles are important, simply because we are not on that platform. So we should have other ways
Yeah.
to look at these things, and I think we are seeing just the beginning of everything.
And I think it's a threat. I mean, you kind of downplayed it a little bit. I think it's an absolute and acute in a way. It's a threat. I mean, the point that he said, I got just as purely as an author, I got emails from some of the big publishers, literally Elsevier and Springer, saying, "Hi, we just wanted to let you know that basically we're feeding all the content that you
Yeah.
published over the last 20 years into LLMs." And I was like, I'm totally unhappy about it. And I understand, of course, how that works policy-wise. I also learned recently that editors for some of the, if you're being appointed an editor at a journal on one of the big commercial platforms, you're signing a legal contract. And I
Yes.
was like, I'm doing what now? Right? I've never heard of that, right? It was you always a service, right? We're doing a service to the field, etc. Now, apparently, we're entering a legally binding contract. And I said, can you give me a copy of that? I don't know what it says, because it hasn't happened to me. But again, that makes me worry, because a legal contract is a commercial transaction.
Hmm.
And, so step by step, it's taken into a
Yes.
direction
Yes. Yes.
where it can be, difficult.
I agree with the step by step, because today it's a few restrictions, tomorrow it's a little bit more restrictions, and then there's finally you will have a place where everything is tied to, workflows and things that are decided not by, that are decided by some underlying logic which we don't have enough control over. So I feel, I think this is the time where the association and the journal have to work together to figure out what we can do. And as I said, it's again an evolution, because every day the technology changes. And so our processes have to be living processes. I don't think they can be ossified processes, these sorts of
Yeah.
processes.
All right, so this is really interesting. This split between publishers and non-publisher journals is now, because of the whole LLM world, becoming much more pronounced.
Yeah.
And if you look at our world, and I actually made this decision once, this was probably a decade ago. I was at Georgia, and I decided, you know what? I don't want to give my labor as a reviewer
Yep.
or an editor or as an author to these for-profit publishing houses, these Elsevier's and Wiley's of the world. I'm not going to give them free labor. So I made this decision on like Monday. And because I did a little analysis and I looked, there's MISQ ISR, right? Informs is ISR. Then there's JAIS. Then there's Organization Science, Management Science, Academy of Management Journal. You look at a lot of the great publications, none of them are big publishers for managers, for us
Exactly.
to have a great career. So, and then you can even look at some others like ACM TMIS, right? Transactions on Management Information Systems. That's ACM.
IEEE. Yep.
There's IEEE. So there's so many great non-for-profit organization academic publishers. I could actually have a great career, having never touched any other. So I decided this on Monday. On Tuesday, one of the PhD students wanted to submit had a revision at like ISJ or something. So I immediately threw my decision out the window, and we published that paper and whatever. But I wonder if I should go back to my view and just be like, you know what? I am not going to contribute either my labor or my intellectual to these for-profit. Like, why shouldn't we do that? Do you think we should all do that? Should we create a grassroots movement to to just go with the non-big publishing houses?
I think that the for-profit publishers have always been there, irrespective of AI and large learning models. So, Nick, I think your decision at that point, whatever drove that decision, nothing has changed. And maybe that those factors have even strengthened. But my point is, we've always had two kinds of journals, and one category has always been for profit. And I could say we could start a grassroots movement. That would be great. But then many of us do. They do provide opportunity for someone to put their thoughts out, to publish papers, for citations. They also help in building the career. And we
Yeah.
also have to look at, after becoming EIC of JIS, I realized that, we are a global community.
Yeah.
And the logics and the decisions that, drive our careers is not the same, across different places. And I've worked in,
It's
my
not, yeah.
PhD was from India, Region 3, and I got my teeth in academia in Region 1, and then I worked in Lancaster, and I realized there are very different logics that drive
Very different systems. Yeah.
academic success, academic meaningfulness, academic progress. So I feel if we did start a grassroots movement, then some of these regions would be more adversely affected
Yeah.
than others. And so part of me says that would not be a responsible thing to do. Although, Nick, yes, you kind of come up with interesting ideas, and this is one of those ideas.
Well, thank you. And I'm on the board of information and organization, and I actually love that journal because I think it publishes some really thoughtful stuff. I think there's some flexibility there. And yeah, it's Wiley or whatever.
No, it's also an Elsevier, but I think you're right, but we shouldn't look at this in a black and white way. I know that I personally, as an individual, I tend to avoid especially Elsevier and Springer. I made bad experience with Springer, more in the book publishing genre. But having said all of that, I also got to realize that all the people and all the individuals that actually run the journals, they are usually in it because of their heart and their idealism, etc. If you look at someone like a Robert Davison or Yolan Chan at JSIS, or even Vladimir or the people at European Journal, I mean, these are pure-hearted academics and they want to do service to the field, etc. If we say let's boycott the journals because they happen to be on the commercial publishers, that's really negatively going to impact a lot of
Yeah,
people.
that's
It also
horrible.
will create scarcity, and not just for papers. It also will create scarcity for career progression in terms of editorial board appointments. I just recently got emails from some younger colleagues, and they were so happy and elated that they got their first AE or their first whatever board position at a really good and reputable journal. And lastly, of course, sometimes the journals or the editors-in-chief, they have very little option not to go with a commercial publisher, because you not only need the free labor, you also need money and infrastructure to run a journal. Monideepa, you wouldn't know this, right? Because JS runs a little bit differently. You literally need money to be able to run a journal. So that's money got to come from somewhere, and not always are we in a position that we can allocate that money from somewhere. And sometimes the big publishing houses, they have the platforms, the infrastructure, and they have some services that we would like to see from JS and other journals as well, right?
So, and I also think that colleagues who are in that journal, who are editors or authors, they are like us. They believe in their work. They're not commercial. No way, right? And so they may be run on a commercial platform, but their day-to-day work and their day-to-day thinking I don't think it's very different from anybody else. And
But I think the key takeaway is like this mindfulness. There is a difference, there are different publishers. And some of them do come, I guess, with a baggage of different types of interests, be they commercial, be they whatever. And I do think it's good to draw attention to this because, there are people that mindlessly submit their paper anywhere just to get their score up and their points up and God knows what else. That also happens. Not everyone is just purely idealistic and God knows what else. So drawing attention to these differences and some of the threats is also, I guess, valid. Huh?
I think this is I think this conversation has just started between publishers and the journals, and this is going to get very big. This is going to be one of the defining questions I feel in the next few years. And we all have to, especially as editors and editors-in-chiefs, we have to sort of drive and shape this in a proactive way rather than just waiting for things to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. So okay, you've talked me out of it. I am not going to boycott the big publishers, although I do have in my head this is crystallizing into a tier system in my head.
So, just at UMass, for example, they will never pay for open access for any of these commercial journals. So it's very different. In these commercial journals, so they have some of these, for example, Elsevier and Wiley, they have institutional agreements with a lot of universities in EU and UK.
Yeah,
Whereby
like the deal
yeah.
arrangement.
So
Yeah.
if you publish there, it's automatically open access if they have that agreement. But when I tried the same thing here at UMass, they said no. They're saying okay, first we have to pay to access their material, and then we have to pay to publish them open access. Like we're getting squeezed. So they refuse to do open access for one of these commercial house journals. But if I have a feeling, if I go for either JIS or MISQ or any of these and other journals which are not run by commercial houses, I will not hear the same answer.
Yeah,
I agree. Like I've done the same thing. Like I've benefited from the deal arrangement, which is a great deal in Europe between the universities and I think what is that? Wiley, I think Wiley and some others, not Elsevier, but
Wiley has it. Yeah,
Wiley has it definitely.
Elsevier also has.
And I personally decided to make some MISQ papers open access, and I had no problem with the fee because I know that fee, charged by University of Minnesota, is actually going towards our journal. And I would never do that. I would never pay Elsevier 5,000 because I know what their balance sheets looked at the end of the year, and I certainly think they don't need my $5,000. So I do think there's a point there as well. But Monideepa, you kind of sidestepped Nick's original question, and I do think this is an important question. Where is JAIS? Is that like in your view? Is that on the bar? Is that the same as ISAR? Is it the same as JMIS, etc.? Because Nick and I have different views on this. For example, for me, it's always been a step ahead of JMIS. It always has been. But also, in Region 3, where I came from, it was always regarded really, 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 really highly. Then again, not quite as ISAR and MISQ. And I remember a couple of years ago, we had Dorothy here when she was the editor-in-chief of JS. And she literally said explicitly, I wanted to attack ISAR. I wanted to take their place. I'm paraphrasing. She didn't quite say it this way. What's your take on this? I mean, are you in a battle? Is that your strategy or your vision that you're going to bring it to that level or keep it at that level or, play that game even, that ranking game?
So I think that depending on who you ask, which region of the world you ask, you have different answers to this question. And I feel that I don't want to be, so I think that all the different answers are all valid because as I said, there's different logics that drive different regions. So the difference between JAIS and JMIS is in the way that the journal is run, right?
Yes.
So that's like an operational difference. Maybe it's also a difference in focus of the two journals. I think that it's a journey for JAIS. If there are universities, for example, in EU and UK, and I think in Region 3 as well, if you published in any of these, you would get the same credit as for tenure and promotion, maybe not on paper, but tenure and promotion. Whereas for example, in North America, it's not that, there are many universities which say, yeah, the three are, there are 4 top journals or 3 top journals or 4 top journals. But if you publish only in 2 of them, you will not get tenure unless you publish in the other 2 as well. Right. And that is what I have seen in the last, I would say 2 to 3 years when I started studying this, is that there are more and more universities which are taking JAIS particularly and classifying it as a premier or an A+. And the internal logic is that, it's an A+, but it's an A+ only if you publish in the other 2 A+, right? Yeah.
So that's it. And really that is
a progress. That is progress from a situation where it is not even an A+, right?
So you know what? There's actually a reverse thing.
The next step for JIS should be, okay, you can publish only in JIS and you still get tenure.
Well, so this is the reverse thing, I think, happening in operations right now. So if you look at North America, so I'm only talking about North America research-intensive schools, you publish an MISQ ISR, that's how you get tenure. And if you get JMIS, that counts. So if you have like whatever your tenure bar is, let's say it's 4 or 5 papers, if you have 2 or 3 in the MISQ ISR, and then 1 JMIS, that JMIS counts as long as you have the others. So that's the way And now JAIS is in that kind of also counting
Yes.
as long as you have
Yes.
MISQ-ISR for a lot of
Yes.
schools. So
Mhm.
that's cool. So JAIS counts. What I've noticed is happening the opposite way in operations. So in operations, they have 4 journals. They have Management Science, MSOM, POMS, and JOM, which is Journal of Operation. And the reason these are the 4 elite journals is that these are the ones
Aren't they
that
all by informs?
they're the
No.
UT Dallas list. No, they're not all in.
JOM is Elsevier.
Yeah. But they're the
Oh,
top 4 operations. And the reason they're top 4 operations is because they're on the UT Dallas list. UT Dallas is the one that made the elite list, unequivocal elite for all the other disciplines. And they added a journal or 2 for operations because they had a strong operations department. So that's like the backstory I heard. I don't know if there's any truth,
oh.
but that's kind of the UT Dallas backstory to why that list has all 4 operations journals. So, and I guess what's happening is, and this is just total speculation in the world but what's happening is management science and MSOM are kind of emerging as the real elite operations journals. And like JOM is great, POMS is great. These are also, but they're just a little bit not as elite as. So it's almost like this caste system is forming in operations in recent years. So it's almost, and it's going to get to the point where they have a similar thing where, yeah, you can get tenure, and POMS and JOM count, but only if you have some MSOMs and some management sciences or something like that, right? So I don't know. That caste system, it's almost like you need 2 elites, and that's all you can have in North
Well,
America.
I mean, like as like the same with operations, I'm guessing here, right? But if you look at IS, I mean, IS has been growing over the last 20, 30 years. So naturally, yeah, to avoid the scarcity problem that you have if you only have 1 or 2 top journals, you need to bump a couple other up, right? And we've seen that happening, of course. And of course, as you bump more in them up and the list of elite journal gets large, then I think very naturally within that list, there's
That's right.
going to be another hierarchy, right? So that's just what happens.
Yeah.
And I think as long as the very material consequences are being spread out. So in other words, you can get your tenure, you can get promotion, you get, I don't know, a higher salary, you support your life and your family a little bit better by anyone within that list. I think that it's fine if intellectually we still make a little bit of a distinction and saying like, this is really just another notch up. I mean, like, I know that for me, it applies to my ambitious and my competitive nature that I think, oh, there's another step up. There's another, so sort of like for me, that's a good thing. But as long as it doesn't hurt anyone, like in saying like, oh my God, you literally don't have your career and, you can't have this job and you can't support your family just because we're trying to be too exclusive, right? So it's a very fine balance between being, supporting a growing community, but still, I think maintaining this idea of meritocracy that we still need that.
Yeah.
We need it for the very simple fact that we need to have ways in which we can distinguish good from bad, one out of hundreds of thousands of journals and papers. We need a way to distinguish them. And the good old idea of you need to read every single one to make up your own mind, that's nice. It's idealistic. It's also naive. It's impossible. People say, oh, you need to read all. Yeah, sure, we do. Of course, we need to do this, but you still need to filter. I cannot read every single IS paper anymore that's being published. It's impossible, right? So I need some sort of markers and signals to distinguish, to help me distinguish a little bit. And journal reputation is one of them.
And to speak to that markets and signals, I think JIS is definitely in the place where the signals are such that we are the highest. We are of very high quality. When I say we, I include all of all of our community members. JIS is clearly there as publishing very rigorous, very high quality research.
Oh,
and there's my personal view in this is that we need to, as I agree with Jan when he says we need to make opportunities for all of our colleagues to publish good papers. That's one thing that we should do. And ranking aside and the little 2+2 aside, I think that as long as our colleagues can say, I put my best effort in this paper, it's a really great paper, I would love to submit it to JIS. That's a great thing. And I see that happening much more now than it used to before. And, both of you, I would say we have to I would love to get up one morning, for all of us to get up one morning and say, now we have 3 or 4, whatever, but it's a journey, right? And
Yeah.
as path dependencies mean that there is jostling. So, POMS was not, POMS was today, if I go by what you just said, Nick, it means that if 2 are going ahead, 2 are going a little bit behind. So there's always going to be, reflexive strategies and actions. And so we would just have to see and, how it plays out, right?
So I think you're absolutely right. I think that point of a journey is a good one, because if you look at that journey, I mean, over the 20 years I was involved, my very, very first paper in an IS journal, it was a JIS, and I submitted in '06, somewhere in the middle of my PhD, and came out later, of course. And then if I look at like where that journal has come from since then, it's amazing. And one also in Signal where you can see this, just have a look at the editor-in-chief. I mean, that is some high profile list that stands up to the very, very best of them. All these names are high profile. Monideepa, I wanted to ask you, is that a little bit intimidating? I mean, I wouldn't be intimidated to follow these giant footsteps. Did you think something like this when you took over?
No, because Monideepa is just as impressive as
I
the entire
know,
list.
of course she is. I mean, but I would be intimidated and proud at the same time.
Well, that's because you have this,
shoes.
Monideepa, we've discussed this before. Wrecker has something called imposter syndrome, where he doesn't think, which I never have, right? I'm always perfectly comfortable with. So, see,
You have the
Monideepa,
opposite. You have poster syndrome. You have poster syndrome. That's what you have.
Monideepa and I don't have imposter syndrome like you, so we're not intimidated by these like big names. Monideepa came from India and became editor-in-chief of JAIS, and
Yeah, I know.
he's not intimidated by anybody.
I think just to speak to Jan's point, I think it's good to be in a place where you always want to improve, and in that and it's good to be in that place. And I think to that extent, if Jan, your imposter syndrome helps you to do that, I would say it's not a bad thing. We should all be in a place where we should all be in a place where we say, we have to go to the next step, all of us.
So you don't have imposter syndrome at all, do you, Monideepa?
I don't know what you mean by imposter syndrome.
See, she doesn't get it either.
It's such an often used expression that it's become, a lot of it's like if you even say I need to get better, that's classified as imposter syndrome.
No, here's what imposter
right.
syndrome. Here's why so many academics, I think, have imposter syndrome. They are the A students. They're just perfect students, and they've always revered their professors as brilliant people. And as I was a bad student, and I didn't revere my professors. I thought I was smarter than all my professors. So when I became one, I didn't think that I'm somehow getting initiated in some rarefied space of the most brilliant people on earth. I thought the only difference between someone with a PhD and not a PhD is 4 years. Now, certainly you weed out the total, incompetent people, but, there are a lot of very moderate intellects that are professors. And it's like, so I was never overly impressed with them. So I think I'm fine. I might not be the most brilliant person, but I can hang with this group,
I think a PhD is a career choice. And, I had an engineering career before my PhD, and I know that those 4 years I didn't earn anything, right?
And you didn't learn anything?
You didn't earn anything.
Oh.
So a PhD is a career choice that you make. And with that career choice, I think what comes as the central part of a PhD is the love for and the urge to create and disseminate knowledge. And as long as that is there and you're comfortable doing that, I don't think we should be intimidated by, other people because they're colleagues like us and they're also on the same path. Maybe their paths are a little bit different than ours. And the second thing about knowledge is because it's so vast and so infinite, you can never say I'm there, right? And so there's nothing wrong with saying I'm never there because you can't ever be there. So I think that's what fascinates me about being an academic is, I'm in a place.
I agree.
I can always say I'm going to look up to the next step because it's like a gateway to, stairway to infinity or whatever. So
yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, like it's a constant profession of learning, and that's such a great privilege. I mean, I'm like, look at me right now. I just took my family to Australia for 2 months, and I'm reading and I'm learning, and I can do these things. It's amazing. I'm just wondering, like, I'm not sitting in a corner rocking like a baby back and forth because I can't handle the intimidation.
And not only that, Monideepa just pointed out to you that she thinks you're weak. I think that's what I heard.
Yeah, no. So I can hang with you guys as well. But this profession for good reason. I'm not criticizing this, but it is a meritocracy and it is an elite. It's just the way this is set up, and this is the way that, well, you could say it's maybe the only functioning meritocracy on the planet. Anyway, but it is one, and that means there is this nature of, I don't know, competition, and you need to fight for your place. You need to get, there's a little bit of that. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I just say this is one of the consequences that comes with this. And it needs to be like that, right? You need to weed out the people that don't belong or that shouldn't.
Sure, but your statement that it might be the only functioning meritocracy, that's silly. I think life is a meritocracy. So anyway, this is what I'd like to do, Monideepa. Before I want to bring it back to JAIS.
Yeah, let's do that.
Give us some plans. I know we had Dorothy on here a year or two ago, and she kind of gave us some of the cool things she's doing, like with the little policy section. My favorite thing about JAIS is the promise articles.
The promise review, yeah.
I think that was like phenomenal. I'm a beneficiary of that with some of my and yeah. I wonder. So what are you thinking nowadays?
So I'm really happy to hear that you were a beneficiary of the promise option, Nick. So what I feel is that the promise option is a great option if it is supported by the rest of the board, right? So if you look at the website, if you look at the information for authors, what the promise option says is that there's two ways to get into the promise option. The first is, you have a paper which you think is a great idea. First of all, it's a great idea, and you want to get in quickly. You want to have an editor who understands the cutting edgeness of that idea, who's willing to help you shape that, and who's willing to take the risks with you, right? And who can perhaps say, okay, I'm going to go through 2 rounds of review, and then I'm going to work with the authors. So you have to be a very active editor in order to get a promise option through. The first thing is that. The second thing is I see a lot of authors saying, "Oh, we would like to work with the editors from the get-go, so we are giving a promise option." No, that's not the reason. The reason is you think that this is the best paper you can write, and you want JAIs to help you shepherd that paper with you to fruition. So the bar is much higher initially, right? Yeah. A lot of promise options do get disrejected because you cannot commit to the fact, because once you say I have a revise and resubmit for a promise option, it means you have seen the potential in the first draft itself, right?
Not in the second draft, not in the third draft.
That's a very difficult thing, and
difficult thing. Yeah.
And Nick, in your case, I'm really happy that it worked out well. But in many cases, if it was a regular paper, the SE might say, "Well, I can't see the option, and I can't see the promise or the potential in this round. But let me give you one more option and come back with a revision, and maybe we can see the potential better then." That happens all the time in review processes, right? But if it's a promise option, the SE might say, "I don't see the potential in the first round. I'm supposed to do that. You're out."
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have a story to this as well. I mean, I have a promise paper that is under review, and it worked exactly as you said, but it's not a shortcut. No. It's not a cheat for authors. So ours was a promise review 3 years ago, and the editor said, "Okay, I like this. Let's work on this." Now this is 3 years, 4 rounds later. Now, and this is fine. And what we as authors really liked was that early commitment. Now, we were happy to work. The paper has completely changed since then, but we knew the commitment was there, and now it's getting towards the final stages. So the whole point of my story is it can be fast. I mean, that's partly our fault, but it's certainly not a shortcut. It's just a slightly different review mode where one way you get commitment early, and then still it's the same work. It's the same persistence, grittiness, stuff to make it work. Because even our paper, which of course we thought was brilliant and fantastic, etc. Of course, it had flaws, and it still needed work to iron out.
So to speak to that, Jan, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something I want to say. When we say promise, it's not just a one-sided promise; it's a two-sided promise. If the SE promises to work with you and the review team promise to work with the authors to improve the paper, the authors cannot say, "Oh, we've got a yes from a promise paper. Now we can just go through, very easily, and we don't have to motions. We don't have to engage with the reviews. We can just do rebuttals and rebuttals and rebuttals, and we are done." So I'm sorry, then it's going to take for years and years, and all your initial idea of let me get this out quickly is not going to go to fruition. So I think it's a promise of higher effort and higher engagement from both sides, and it will not work unless both sides are equally promised on it. So we should not think it's a one-sided promise. I think a lot of authors tend to think, and this is, in the the short time that I've been EIC, I think my overriding sense of the promise option is it's not really well understood sometimes by authors. They think it's a promise by the journal, and that doesn't require a promise from their side.
Right.
So please do both sides. And I'm sure, like Jan said, and I'm sure you did the same thing when you got your paper accepted. It goes by default. It goes without saying, if I have a promise from the editorial team, I as an author have to keep the same promise. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Well, we had a wonderful experience. First of all, it was a very mature paper. It was very
Yes,
good.
that's what. So it has to start with a mature paper.
And it frankly went a couple of rounds at another journal, was rejected, and it was rejected for kind of an unfair reason. And we're like, this is ridiculous. And it was this really nicely, we were very proud of it. The analytics were, and we did like 2 quick rounds in the promise. We submitted it as a promise, 2 quick rounds. It wasn't, and I think they only used like reviews for 1. And then boom, we were in. And it's like that year, it went from submission to, and that to me was like, okay, why can't we do this for more papers? Why can't we do this for a lot of papers? And I think so there are 2 things that I see happening, Monideepa. One is, I think people are burned out in reviews, so they take forever. That's because the editors will send out to review things that they should have desk rejected. That's one thing that I think we do too much. We use reviews instead of just desk rejecting. So it's almost like we should always have a promise whenever we send it to review. Then the other thing I see people doing is you use reviewers way too long, where 3rd, 4th, 5th round, they're still using reviewers. It's like, all right, editor, if you don't know enough at this point from the reviewers to make your decisions, so it's like if a promise does use reviewers for 2 rounds and doesn't send it out to review unless they think they can publish it, shouldn't that be all journal papers? Shouldn't every single paper submitted to JAIS only go to review if the editor thinks they can publish it, like they see an option? And shouldn't they only use 2 rounds of reviewers and then we'd have a much more pleasant culture in our.
I think what you say is, all journals try to do that. I think we've been having this conversation in our discipline for a long time. How many rounds do you have? And every time a new editor comes in a journal, they say, okay, no more than 2 rounds, no more than 3 rounds. But the reality is that, as I said, for something like a promise to happen, you have 3-4 conditions that need to be met. Paper has to be mature, the editor has to be an active editor, and the authors have to be committed, right? And if these conditions do not happen for all sorts of papers, and they don't happen for all papers, many papers are not, the contribution is not apparent in the first, in the original submission, but they might still get to publication. So I think that's why promise is a good option, because you don't have to take that option. But if you take that option, you fully understand the risks. The desk rejects are higher. The bar to clear the review, to get to the review stage, is much higher for a promise option, as it should be, right? Otherwise, it won't work. If it's not, as you said, yours was a mature paper, and the maturity can come from either I've been working on it for a long time, or others have reviewed it and got it to a stage where it's mature. So it can come from different places. I'm not discounting any of those, but it has to be a mature paper. And the SE has to, for instance, in the promise option, if you look at what's there on the website, we use SEs only will go to the senior, reviewers who are senior, who can, who can see the things, who can look at things, who can take a chance if they want to. And so it's the review process is also, the people who are reviewing the paper are different. And they know that if they say, okay, go ahead, it need not be a conditional acceptance in the first round, even if it's a major revision. It means that the reviewers have seen the potential and they're mature enough to work with it. If a reviewer says, oh, I've done the first round and now I'm off, it doesn't work. So it's the doing is in the details of the promise option. And when all the details come together, I think it's a beautiful option.
Oh, sorry, I have a different question, right? Like a slight pivot. So JS has always been a Big Ten paper. It really has. I mean, it probably was a Big Ten journal for the field before some of the other journals also spread their diversity of methods and so forth. At the same time, I think, at least in my interpretation, it's always been a home for theory papers. And it always has been a home for design kind of papers, especially when Shirley took over, right? So it always had these two, I guess, particular emphasis, although it always accepted everything. Will you set a particular thematic or, conceptual or methodological focus in your journal moving forward?
So Jan, before in the last couple of years, after we did that intellectual diversity paper and ISR, we looked at a few other journals as well, and I can tell you that I agree. The numbers support what you're saying. The numbers support that JAIS has a distinctive, is very distinctive with among the other journals in studying a wide range of traditional IS phenomenon in terms of topics, in terms of focus on macro level topics, micro level topics. We have a wide range. And the methodological variety is also very wide, as you said. So the numbers support this. We are also a leading contributor in three areas. One is artifact-related papers. The other
nice.
is the other one is artifact-related papers, and the other thing that you didn't mention is IS methods. So the methodological sphere of when we talk about methods in IS research, JIS is a leading contributor in that with a focus on that as well. And the third thing I think we have done very well, as you said, is we have pushed the edge. We've pushed the envelope in terms of theory development. How can you develop theories? I think that these three should be maintained, and they can be maintained by taking them in three new directions, and I'll say what those are. The first is the theory development, right? We used to do the traditional, very like 10 years ago, if you say I'm doing theory development, it was mostly from qualitative data, right? That's our kind of, this is a theory paper, so it looks at literature, it looks at, some examples from qualitative research and qualitative data, and so theory used to be built mostly on that. But now we have more, we have different ways of building theory. So one focus that we have in JI, so what I've, tried to inculcate is building theory from big data. And we are calling it all sorts of names, right? And Nick knows that, and we see it in AOM, the workshops that you run. But essentially what it means is, build your understanding from different kinds of data, and that needs new methods, that needs new approaches. And JIS is, we want to be strong in that area. We want to be one of the leaders in that area. B is artifact, right? So the artifact is changing on us. It got all sorts of things now, which we didn't have even 5 years ago. And so design science now has to look at these new kinds of artifacts through new approaches. And so that's the second place where I want JIS to be a leader. We are not distancing ourselves from our strengths, but we have to build on what strengths we have to take these areas in these two new directions. So these are two different things I want to do, or I've started doing, or I put things in, set things in motion, and we'll be doing more. The third thing I think we want to do is, it's the epistemic diversification of the identity of the IS scholar. As I said, we are a community journal. We are about the IS community, and our epistemic identities are broadening, in the sense we are doing more than just publishing, right? And but there should be a scholarship to that. We are a research journal. We are not a practice-based. We are a research journal. So the research about broadening your epistemic identity. How do you do that as an IS scholar, not just as any scholar, right? And so one of the things we are doing is, for example, many of us contribute or work with think tanks or policy organizations, and not that we are saying that. So it's not just doing the practice; it's understanding how to do the practice. So building theoretical knowledge and conceptual knowledge about how to create these kinds of epistemic variations or broadenings from what we are currently doing. So that's a third.
Is there already an exemplar paper out that speaks to this, what you just talked about? Is there a recent paper?
So there are a few. So you mentioned policy, right? So there are a few policy editorials you could look at. But what we are doing is, so we have a virtual workshop 28th of March, and it's a policy workshop. It's on LinkedIn, on JIS's LinkedIn account. It's on JIS's webpage also. You can take a look at what that workshop is doing. It is exactly about what I just mentioned, and we have a fireside chat with two, senior colleagues who've done this kind of work, and it's also going to be a development workshop. People are submitting. We've asked authors to submit some things. I won't repeat what is there, but you can take a look at the bullet points, and anybody who's listening can do that as well. So we are trying to, have a coherent effort in bringing together the interests that our community has in broadening our epistemic identities and building knowledge on how to do that. So that's one thing. And from that will flow other efforts to do this, maybe editorials, maybe special issues, maybe more papers on this. But it's something that we should start doing.
So this sounds like the evolution of the policy effort that Dorothy started. It's like, okay, well, policy, and I always argued that most IS people I know, probably including myself, probably shouldn't be setting policy for anybody because we have no business. Right? But maybe there are a few that should. I don't know who.
So we shouldn't be
Woolcutter.
setting policy. Nick, I don't think it's the same as setting policy, because setting policy has, it's done by people who are in those kinds of structures. But there are ways to inform policy without actually setting it, So there is a translation to be done between my research and what I can tell other people that will be useful for them. And that translation, there's knowledge to be built in that translation, whether it's through structures. How can I do that? So we're not going to set policy because we're not policymakers. We can be if we want to. We can leave our jobs and go and be policymakers. Nothing wrong with that. But we still remain scholars, right?
So what's the difference? What's the difference between what you're talking about, which you're calling, I guess, epistemic diversity, or or broadening the epistemic?
Broadening of your identity, basically.
Broadening the identity. What's the difference between that and writing practitioner papers? Because isn't that what our practitioner papers are supposed to do, is make our research, I guess, appealing to a practitioner audience?
Yeah, so in the practitioner papers, my experience of writing practitioner papers means I take my research and I distill those things that the practice, distill those things in a way that the practitioner understands, whether it's language, whether it's concepts, whether it's whatever. So I do the distillation and I tell the person this is what I don't reflect on the process. So when you talk about policy, you're not just saying this is my information, you do what you want with it. Like you write an HBR paper or an SMR paper and you do what you want with it. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is if if I've done some work which, for example, uses data or uses, some problem-based formulation, and I have a research project which looks at that kind of thing, and I have my, academic articles from that's fine. But I also have a lot of insights, a lot of, advanced interpretations of data that I think can be helpful to somebody who's sitting at a much higher level and looking at multiple either government departments or areas of citizen life and things like that. What's the process by which I can go to them? And when I say process, it's not just calling up and ringing somebody up. You may have to build structures in order to do that. You may have to frame your research project from the get-go in order to be able to do something like that. You may have to write, for example, in the UK, when you write grants, I think in NSF it's the same thing. You have to have an impact statement which runs 3 to 4 pages. So it has to be at the level of the conceptualization. So it's not just writing something after I've done the research and say, okay, here's what it is, you do what you want with it. That's nothing wrong with that, right? Because that's also enjoyable. And many of us do that. But it's more starting, it's the entire pipeline, I would say. And then how you, the translation part of it after your actual research is over. We don't quite, so there's literature in other areas, in policy areas, but then, we always need to sort of contextualize it to IS. It's policy, just like anything else. So that's the kind of, knowledge that I think would be fruitful for JIS. And you're right, the policy section has been, actually it's been there since the time of Supratik. It's been there for a long time, maybe even before. I don't know. I mean, I know that it was there since Supratik. So we are, so we have a very good sort of base on which to build on, right? We don't have to scratch. But as I said, all the 3 things I said is about building on the base, but it's also taking it, forward in keeping with what's going on, in our life, in our professions, and in our discipline.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, it's a novel direction, that's for sure. It's also a direction where I see a lot more colleagues actually being engaged in. I mean, I know it used to be 1 or 2 individuals that I know that were doing public engagement or policy advice. And now I think there's a lot more. I mean, people are looking for us academics. I don't know, when it comes to AI regulation, I know that a lot of us are in blockchain regulation, these sorts of things. So I do think this is part of some people's identity, that's for sure. Hey, Monideepa, I know we're running out of time, but I have one note here on my note still that I wanted to ask you about, which is the whole AI in the publishing process. just because you as editor-in-chief, you get to see all the papers, you get to see all the reviews. And I think people are discussing this a lot. I see this in my LinkedIn feed a lot. And I just wanted to get some evidence, like how much do you see AI by authors, like in paper writing, and how much do you see AI in the peer review process? Do you see a lot of reviews with like this has been, generated by ChatGPT? And what's your take on this?
So if you go to JIS's website, one of the so since starting December 1st, we had a Gen AI policy for authors. And if you look at the policy, it has there are 4 different bullet points.
Aspects to it, yeah.
Each bullet point has 2 check boxes, either yes or no. So net, what we have said is, each of those bullet points, whether you click yes or whether you click no, what you're essentially saying is that this is my work. I may have used Gen AI for various stages, those 4 stages. But even if I click yes on those 4 stages, I still say that it's the way they are worded is nobody's whatever. Gen AI is not a co-author. I have not put any material in the paper that is generated by Gen AI. I have retained intellectual sort of contributions on what I've submitted. The interesting thing is that when we get those statements, that has to be included in the cover letter. It's just a 1 page and you have to just tick boxes. We made it as easy as possible. We're not writing. It shouldn't be a burden on somebody who's used ChatGPT or whatever else. But what we are seeing is that most people are, most colleagues are using it for writing. And if they're using it as a writing aid, and understandably and predictably so, right? Don't see too many people. I don't see too many people saying we have used it to do a literature review, or we have used it as an aid to, I don't know, conceptualization or whatever. Some papers, and that many of us are using it in our analysis and methods, right? And we are still discovering how best to talk about it in the paper itself. And so those papers have that all of that use as a part of methods, like you use any other tool, whatever it is. And so that's there in the methods. And then for the editor's reports, reviewers are told, when reviewers sign on to, agree to review a paper, they agree to, we want to tell the reviewers and anybody else whose hands are passing on the paper, so to speak, do not put it in a this is copyright, this IP belongs to the authors because it's not yet been published. And so we have to be honest to that effort, and we cannot put any of this in an engine because it's not, it's the author's copyright. So that is something that reviewers to do. For that, that is the second thing. As I said, this is very, very evolutionary. These tools are changing. So for example, 3 years ago, you would say Grammarly is not Gen AI, but today Grammarly is also Gen AI, right? So things are changing. So things are changing very fast. And as I said, these policies and all, you cannot say I have locked something in and it cannot change, right? These things can change, and these are not static documents. But as of now, this is what we have. And as of now, the Gen AI applications that we have, I think these things can cover that. That's what it is.
And do you see it a lot being like do you have issues with AI written reviews? Because frankly, I don't, these things are difficult to spot, but I don't see, I haven't personally had a big issue with that. In that,
I think, Nick, as Jan, as anything, this has to be a socio-technical effort, right? As everything else we do, we can, there's nothing that's, I'm sure there are applications that one can buy and run, you can run your papers through that, but that's not going to solve the issue right now. At JIS, we don't have such an application. As far as I know, in no other journal do we have such an application as of now. And by no other journal, I mean the usual IS journals we talk about. That's not to say we cannot have it in the future, like a plagiarism check, right? But still, I think it has to be, because this is a much more complex thing. I think it's the AEs and the editors have to be very, very careful when they look at the reviews. They have to be very alert. It's very important to stress here that without this kind of vigilance and alertness from the editors, whether it's associate, senior, editor-in-chief, we are not going to be able to, if there is something that's coming through which is generated by some of these applications, we are not going to be able to identify them as of now. It has to be an
Yeah.
effort by both the technology and the people who are handling that paper. It's very important.
Yep. All right. Well, I'll tell you what.
That's a
Monideepa.
very elevating note to end this, right?
Well, I know. No, here's the thing. No one knows what to do with these LLMs. No one knows what to do with. We're in a tough spot right now with editors, with authors, with analysis, and it's all emerging. We should probably talk about that one time, Wrecker. Would that be interesting?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I don't know enough. All I know is that it's a wild west and there's a bunch happening.
There is a Wild West. Yes, you're right. You're right. You're right.
But here's the thing, if you're in the Wild West, then it's yours to shape, right? That's the opportunity.
That's a funny way to look at the Wild West. When I think of the Wild West, I think of people with guns that shoot other people.
Well, we don't have to be the one with guns, but you can still shape
Read
it.
Cormac McCarthy's books about they're like the realistic books of the Wild West. It's grim. It's brutal.
Yeah.
All right. So listen, Monideepa, thank you. And I'll tell you what, as you said, I'm cheering for you and for JAIS. I love this journal.
Yep.
I'm very thrilled that you're the editor in chief of this journal, and I know you're going to do a great job with it. I wish you all the best.
Thank you. It was great talking to both of you. As we all say, we are all custodians of our field, and as editors in chief or as senior editors or whatever, it's our job to make sure that the time that we spend with the journal is well spent in that, and we take it forward. We take the field forward. We take the journal forward. That's how we approach it, right?
Yep.
So
But Monideepa, I know you a little bit by now, so just make sure you get some sleep. I mean, you must be working like crazy.
Thank you. I will, Jan. That's very good advice, and I'll take that.
Yes.
But thank you both for inviting me to this conversation. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Monideepa.
Yep. See you.
See you. Bye.
See you. Bye.